about sort of interest of water and energy, and should be exciting and a little bit different from electrification, so for people who are more into that, just so you know. And I also wanted to just let people know that an MIT alumnus is here, who is working on a project on island electrification in the Philippines, and he's fairly open to talking about his work, so if you want to talk to him, his name is Alex Kornstein, and now I can't see him. Oh, he's sitting over there. Yeah, definitely find him afterwards if you're interested in hearing more about his work, and if we have time, we can throw some slides up if he wants to too. So anyway, let me just introduce you quickly. This is Johannes Urpelainen. He's a political scientist from Columbia University. This is upside down. His research focuses on environmental and energy policy at the international, national, and subnational levels. He's been really great to come today and not only talk to E4Dev, but also talk to the Tata Microgrid research team about his proposed research on impacts of microgrids in India. And so,
thank you. First, my apologies. I think I misunderstood the affiliation here. I've had some meetings with Tata Center, but apparently this is a different thing. I wasn't aware of that. It's a little difficult to follow all the things that are going on here at MIT. So today's talk is about using solar power and these community microgrids to provide electricity to unelectrified or fully electrified villages in India. And I'm going to talk about two aspects of the problem. The first one is adoption. So electricity is a commodity or is a service that people may or may not want. And then the other side is impact. So the reason we care about electrification is not just because of the sort of consumer value or quality of life improvement of electricity, but there's some hope that maybe it can contribute to development more broadly and help India become a sort of nicer and more convenient place to live for everybody. And so what I'm going to do is I'm first going to give you a bit of background on this problem, and then after that I'm going to talk about the research that I'm hoping to do starting next year. The background here is that even though India as a country has made a lot of progress economically, it's no longer considered what is known as a least developed country. Its GDP is higher than the official World Bank threshold for that. It's a fairly wealthy country by some standards, but the reality is that the wealth is very unequally distributed in India. And it turns out that in the latest census in 2011, there were still 400 million people in India who had no electricity access at all. So they didn't even have the basic lighting services at home. This doesn't mean that there hasn't been any progress. The situation was a lot worse in 2001. There was the same number of people who didn't have electricity, but India's population was hundreds of millions smaller back in those days. So India is making progress, but the way things are going, it's going to be a long, long sort of march until we get to the sort of high levels of electrification that we see, for example, in China, where almost every household now has electricity. In 2011, 31% of the Indian population still used kerosene as their primary lighting solution, which is problematic in several reasons. It's fairly expensive. It's a little hazardous. There are many kerosene fires in India. It's an environmental risk, and in fact, it also contributes to global warming because the black carbon that the kerosene burning emits is a serious problem. Solar power, which is what I'm going to look at, just 2 years ago, it was still a fairly marginal cost. So less than 0.5% of the population has this. This is a new addition in the census, by the way, that they now ask about solar power to the households in particular. They didn't do it in the 2001 census. So now we finally have data on this. You can see it's not completely trivial. This is like 60 million people or something, so it's not a trivial thing, but it's still small compared to the sort of total potential. So here's a bit of geography. So for those of you who don't study India, who are not from there, the way things often work in India is that the south does a lot better in everything than the north, and it's also the case with electrification. So the southern states have made great progress in this regard. Also the very northern states, the Himalayan states, have made great progress in electrification because hydropower is very cheap there, so it's available pretty much for everybody. Where the problem lies is in these sort of northeastern states, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar have very low electrification rates, both less than 50%. Bihar, in fact, is in the sort of 20-25% range, which is abysmal. So it means that there are many more people in Bihar who have no electricity than who have some, and even those who have electricity suffer from frequent blackouts, outages. So the problem is geographically concentrated. The problem is that Uttar Pradesh and Bihar are among the largest states in India. So together there are 300 million people living in those two states. So this is a big problem. One-third of India is suffering from this problem, and it's very heavily concentrated. That's where my research is. I do most of my research in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of give you a bit of a case study. So I'm going to tell you about the company with whom I'm doing this research, Microgrids Power. I know that those of you who are affiliated or who are aware of the Tata Center's work, you might know something about this because they have visited their sites in Uttar Pradesh, probably the same places where I was. Some of them are easy to reach from the office, so that's probably where we were. I'm going to tell a bit about the business model and what I think of their idea and why I think it's promising. Then I'm going to tell about my research. So my idea is to do this experiment, look at the impacts of Microgrids business, and then I'm going to tell a little bit about what kind of effects we expect to see. And I'm going to give a kind of a generous interpretation there in the sense that I'll tell you all the possible things that could improve because I'm not going to, at this point, sort of put my money on, I think this one is going to improve, this one is not, but I'm going to tell you all the different things that somebody out there has said could improve because of this electrification. And then the experiment will tell us which of those actually improve and which ones don't. By the way, I just remembered I was sort of told that I should try to set some rules here. So if you have any questions during the talk, feel free to interrupt me. That's not a problem for me at all. I'm a political scientist, so I'm used to both the sort of nice and kind of polite mode of interaction. Sometimes I present in economics, so I'm also used to the sort of aggressive mode of interaction. So I can do both, depending on what you prefer. Okay, so here we go. So this is a photo that I took during one of my field visits. This was a year ago in Uttar Pradesh. This is Sandeep. Sandeep is one of the Microgrids guys. And here he's looking at the two solar panels. And the idea here is that we are in a village where Sandeep is setting up the solar panels. He sets up a few solar panels in a house or maybe two. Then he draws the connections to different households. And then he sells electricity to those households based on a monthly payment. So this is not a complicated prepaid system where they measure, where you have to make a payment, and then they regulate your load depending on how much you pay. It's a very simple system. You make a monthly payment, you get a fixed amount of power, and in fact, they even tell you what kind of services you can use. So it's a very simple system. One thing that's odd about this picture is that this was in January. It's not supposed to rain in January in India. We had what is known as a winter monsoon. Which I think the last time this happened was in 1947. It was really bad. It made life for these farmers incredibly difficult because they didn't expect this. This is one of the things that's going on in that area. Often in the world, the way things happen is the people who already have it bad suffer the most from all these things we cause, like climate change. India is one great example of that. The areas that are most vulnerable are the poorest already. And Uttar Pradesh is suffering from this a lot. One of the anecdotes is that in one village where people were supposed to go to some kind of a meeting, they usually ride their motorcycles or bikes or something. They took the boat there during this monsoon. So it was a little disturbing to be there. A lot of work to be done. Oh wow, that is too fast. Let's do a little more time. So now what I want to tell you is I want to tell you a bit about this Microgrids power business. Microgrids, in Hindi, if I understood this correctly, is my village. Mira is my village. Okay. All the off-grid electrification companies have names like Village Power, My Village Power, Rural Power. They're very uninnovative in that sense, even though in other ways they are quite innovative. So here's how the business works. So what Microgrids Power basically provides is that you get two LED lights, stationary sort of lighting solutions. You get a mobile charging system, very popular in India, and you pay $2 a month. And Microgrids guarantees that you get power for these every day. The lights go on at night, so they're not. You kind of yes.
My understanding is in much of rural India they don't pay for their electricity. They're on the grid. So
from the grid, that's true. So if you have a grid connection, people often have illegal connections. They just hook the line there. With these microgrids, it's a little different because they go to these villages, and if you didn't make the payment, they'll just remove the.
Because you're competing with free.
Yes, well, it's free, but it's not available in sort of amounts or at the times when you need it. So I did some surveys in 2 villages that have been recently electrified by the government. And the one thing that the villagers wanted to tell me was how disappointed they are. Because they had been told that they'll get electricity, they can use it for all these things. It was only available during the day when they're in the fields. You don't need electricity there. And it was available at 2 a.m. in the morning. It was never available at night because that's when the industry actually has the peak hours into Pradesh. And that's when the middle class puts on the AC and watches TV. And as things go, the middle class always gets the electricity first. And if there's none available, then the rural villages don't get it. Yeah.
Does the price and the system that includes battery storage?
Yeah, so basically, well, I mean, you don't really need the battery storage here for the households because the battery is central. So there is a battery with the solar panels, and then the households really just get the connection and the lights. So, so the system is very simple. That's one of the reasons why it kind of works in that area, I think, is that it's a very simple system. It doesn't have any complicated features. So the limitations of the system are also the strengths of the system. It doesn't allow you to do any complex things. It doesn't provide nearly enough power to run a fan or a fridge or something like that. But that's why it's simple to manage, and that's why you can use it in this complex environment here. Yeah.
Who pays for installation?
Basically, the company itself provides the capital cost, and then the households have to make a small initial payment, basically as part of their first monthly payment. Yeah.
How many hours is it available at a time?
So the lights I think are usually on for maybe 4 or 5 hours a day, from 6 p.m. to let's say 10:30. There's very little need for electricity before that, and then late at night you just go to bed. There's no need then. It's a very it's a fixed system. They come on at a certain time, and then they run till whenever the sort of cutoff is, and then it's over. Yeah.
I'm sorry, maybe I missed it. Did you say what the generation is of one installation?
So
Generation capacity?
it's very little. It's I would say maybe 200 watts, something like that. So very, very small amounts of power. And that's actually one of the reasons here is that if you think of these solar power systems, if you look at the cost per unit of electricity, it's very high compared to a coal plant. It's an extremely high cost. But the reason why this makes sense still is that today with these LED systems and efficient mobile charging, you don't need a lot of power to provide basic services. Whereas some of the other companies provide enough power, for example, let's say to have a thresher or a water pump or something, the cost that the households have to pay is of course a lot higher. And they're more or less based on a completely different idea where the households would make money using that power, and then they would use that revenue to pay for it. So installation cost, I said, about $800 to $1,000. We get maybe 30 or 40 households, it's $25 a household. Yeah.
Can you describe typically what people are using the energy for? So we've got, what is it? Did you find that it's light bulb? Is it up there?
Those 2
Light
things, yeah.
bulbs.
So you only have 2 light bulbs, you have mobile charging. That's it.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all
Nothing
included in the
else.
Yeah,
system.
it's all included as part of the contract. Is you get the LED lights and the mobile charger. There's nothing more you can do with these kinds of. That's the big thing here, right? Is you cannot do anything more with a payment like this. Okay. So if you want to use this, the next step, what people usually want and ask for is a fan, but that requires so much more power that the payment would be, I don't know, $10 or something. It's a completely different ballgame if you want to run a fan using solar power. These are the 2 services that we can provide with a few watts per house. So it's expensive, as I said, per unit it's extremely expensive. The good thing is reliability. So my understanding is that the service is very reliable. They almost never have these problems. The only exception is that if there are some sort of unexpected floods or something during the monsoon, or these days, as I said, outside the monsoon, then there could be trouble. But even that, ultimately, compared to the electricity you get from the grid, this is a lot more reliable. Because the grid, it's really a coin flip on any given day if you get any electricity at all. And if you do, the voltage it's a random number generator, what kind of voltage you get. So that breaks any sort of equipment assets you have, unless you have a voltage stabilizer, which itself is very expensive. And as a result, the grid electricity, it really is a completely different commodity than what's provided here. Most households in a typical village can afford this. So $2 a month, it's not a trivial payment for this household. It's not something that, oh, whatever, like it would be for us, it's a cup of coffee, right? But it's still also not so expensive that the typical household cannot afford. So I would say maybe 3/4 of the households are interested in this, in a typical, well, ultra-product village. If you go to the southern parts of India, it would be a lot more than that. But then since the electrification rates are better there, there's a little less demand for them. So this is how the business works in practice. I think my understanding of this business is that many of the challenges for making this profitable are on the sort of soft side of things. So that if you have a technology like this, it's very simple. You don't need an MIT PhD to design the system for something like this. I'm sure many of the undergrads here would do it with after their first year coursework. But trying to make the business work in a sort of environment where business is not what people mostly do, and where this is a new thing, regulations are complicated, there are monsoons all the time. It's very difficult to make that work, and I think that's where many of the challenges for these firms are. And whenever I talk to these guys, of course, they don't want to tell me everything because they're a little worried that somebody figures out why they're able to make it happen. They're very impressive in terms of electrification. Last time I was talking to them was in July. They had maybe 300 villages, now they have close to 600. So they do 100 villages a month, which is, I think, pretty decent for a small company. Yep.
What's your relationship with Marigold?
My relationship is twofold. One is I'm trying to do the impact evaluation with them. I don't have any stocks or nothing. I'm not trying to advertise them. On a personally, I like the guys a lot. We're good friends. So that's my relationship.
And how did you get linked up?
When I went to India, I contacted all these different off-grid entrepreneurs and asked if I can go and visit them and see their sites. And Marigold Power was one of the ones who was interested in this idea. So I basically just called as many as I could, and some of them said, no, we don't have time for that, and others said, please come. I didn't have to pay for all those visits. It turns out that there's enough interest in the academic community, this off-grid business now, that it's not like for them this is a great thing that some professor comes and takes a look. It's a sort of almost like an annoyance to some degree these days. They get a lot of email. 5 years from now, who knows, maybe microgrids are no longer the fact and we'll be doing something else. Okay, so why is this a good thing? So as I said, if you think of the concept, that you get 2 lights and a mobile charger. It's not like we are looking at a revolution, okay? So this is not something that's going to turn these rural villages into economic powerhouses. We're not looking at some transformation. But my sense of the development business, and I'm not a development economist myself, but my sense is that usually when we try to do those revolutions, we end up doing a lot more, causing a lot more trouble than we do good. So I'm interested in practical solutions that make life easier and provide some benefits, and here's a few reasons why this could be a good thing. So one of them is that kerosene is a bit of a problem. So kerosene lamps are really cheap. So a kerosene lamp can cost 50 rupees, which is less than $1. Okay? But the quality of the lighting is very problematic. So you have to burn a lot of kerosene to get this kind of lighting. Okay? In fact, if you want to get anything outside this sort of flickering, really low quality, low lumen solution, you have to burn a lot of kerosene. So it's not a good way if you want to read. It will really make your eyes hurt. Okay, so that's one thing, it's quality. The second one is the cost. So India has a system, a kind of a public distribution system, where they provide subsidized, inexpensive kerosene. But it's never available in the kinds of amounts that a family of 5 would need. So people have to buy from the private providers, and then it's very expensive. So kerosene, they pay more than $2 a month for their kerosene if they want to get daily lighting for 3 or 4 hours. So some of them decide to give up on lighting, they go to bed at 7. Others use this thing, but then they pay a lot for it. Okay? And then, interestingly, health and safety are also issues. So health comes from the fact that when you burn it, the combustion process is very imperfect. As a result, there is some air pollution. It's not, I don't want to overstate this, because compared to the cooking stoves, which are absolutely terrible, this is not a huge deal. But in some of those households, for example, where they cook outside, which is common in Rajasthan, this is the main sort of source of air pollution. Because air generally in the rural areas is not, it's quite clean and sort of convenient. But safety is a big thing. And this is something I sort of learned when I went to the villages, was that when you interview people and you start talking about kerosene and lighting and all that, one of the things they often mention is, yeah, I had a kerosene fire 5 years ago. And that's why I have this big scar here that still hurts and makes it really difficult for me to go to the fields. It's very common. So kerosene is a very dangerous way to get your lighting. Okay, so the first person I ever met in a village, when I did this interview, he sort of kept repeating that, yeah, in the 1990s we had this big kerosene fire, you know, I still have these burns and they hurt, and it makes, and he was a landless laborer, so his work is really hard. So it was very difficult for him. And he was very happy to hear that we're interested in solar and all that. And then sort of, so those are the improvements. The other thing is that there is some anecdotal evidence. I don't know how systematic this is. There's some anecdotal evidence that sometimes this lighting actually makes people sort of do kind of small business-like activities that increase their revenue. So one thing I've seen is this roadside vending. So it's not like you need the light to sell stuff when you go to this. But if you, for example, want to bake things, it's a very popular thing to do in India is to sell baked goods. You can do that at home a lot more easily if you have reliable lighting solution, because the things look a lot better when you know what they look like, and then it's easier to sell them. Okay. Another thing is the sari decoration. This is in UP, this is a big business. So many households at night, they decorate these saris. And if you have bad lighting, then you can maybe sell it in Lucknow, where it doesn't make all that much money. If you have good lighting and it's a great sari, you can go to Delhi or Mumbai, where it makes 3 to 4 times as much. So you make a lot more money if you have good lighting. What some households, of course, they do is they use these battery charged lights, but those are incredibly expensive. So this is a great business for somebody who's interested in sari decoration. Another one that this is really interesting. Yeah.
Oh, actually, I was just going to ask about the battery charged lights, because when I visited, we spoke to a professor at IIT Bombay, and he was working on I think the project was called 1 Million Lights.
Okay.
And so they were selling lamps for students for reading at $6, including a little miniature, the panel and the battery. And I don't know too much about the cell phone charging aspect of this, but for $6 for a light like that, it seems like it would be almost worth getting that rather than paying $2 a month.
So, yeah, that's what I initially thought. When I went to India, I wanted to do solar lanterns. That was my interest. But when I actually talked to the villagers and I talked to people who tried to sell this, mine wasn't quite $6, $7. But nobody wants to buy it, really, because it doesn't provide a good solution. So imagine that you live in a completely dark household. You have this little thing that provides a tiny bit of light. So maybe one child can read using that, but it's not at all the same as having a sort of...
So you said this was a at the very beginning you said
two LED lights.
2 LED
but
lights.
their brightness compared to the lanterns is a lot better. So these provide lighting for the entire big room, so you can have 6, 7 people reading or something. Whereas the lanterns, it's just really kind of a targeted light. I have one of those. I use it at my summer cabin if the lights go out. Yeah.
Can you describe the design of the solar lamp?
So the simple one is, it's a very small, it is this size, okay? It has the one that I've seen, it has a tiny solar panel in the back, and then it has it has an LED system. It has two different levels. So there's a low level of lighting, which is really not enough for anything except kind of going outside and seeing what's going on. And then it has a so-called high level lighting, which is decent and bright, but only for a very small targeted area. And then it has this little, I don't know how to describe it, it's something that you can use to kind of put it on a table or something, and so that you can turn it and so.
Does it have an inverter built into it?
No, not at all. No, this is...
No, it's direct light?
Yeah, there are systems that have sort of fancier systems. These things cost like $60, $70 or something. And there's a different market for those. What happens with those is that the middle income sort of households take them as a secondary solution. They have a solar home system, and they take the lantern so that they can go outside and do this. I think the big benefit of the lantern is that it's portable. So often, my guess is that in the long run, or at least in the medium run, what households will do is they'll have the stationary solution, either home system, microgrid, but then they have the lantern as a kind of a secondary thing, because going outside at night, if there's snakes or something, it can actually be really dangerous.
If you have a chance, get 2 of them and point them at each other and see if they'll run off each other.
Interesting. I'll have to give it a try.
It's an experiment we run in electrical engineering.
Oh, really? Okay, interesting. So I'll have to see if that could work. That would be very interesting. Because that one sounds pretty good to me. Okay, so the final thing I wanted to mention is this livestock planting. So this is sort of something very amazing. I have no idea that this is possible. So some of these households own cattle, of course not the poorest, but the sort of middle income by rural standards, which is not a lot, but it's a bit. So they often own like 2 or 3 cows, and they produce milk, and then they sell the milk. So now the quality of milk depends very much on how happy and sort of the cows are. And as a result, you have to spend a lot of time actually working on them, making sure that they don't have any diseases or pests, insects, something, no trouble. So you have to check them every day. And this apparently is something that's a major pain for some of these households during the day because they're supposed to be in the field, taking care of the farm and the crops. And instead they have to take care of livestock. So what they use this lighting for is that at night, they bring the light outside, they just bring the wire outside, they bring the cows in and then they check them using the bright light. So this is something that apparently improves the quality of the livestock and it saves time during the day, so that's a kind of a nice benefit. So the third thing I want to mention at this point is that $2 a month, as I said, it's not a trivial thing, but one nice thing is that you don't need to make this upfront payment. So a solar home system that provides a typical similar solution, it can be like $100 or something, and that doesn't include the maintenance cost over time, but you need to have an initial capital. $100 for us is not a big investment, but for these households it is a big investment. So it's hard for them to get it. So unless there is some kind of a financing solution, then it's not possible. And some companies provide solar home systems with a financing solution. So they get kind of close to this kind of lease model, which has its benefits, but then it depends on having an appropriate bank. And right now, for example, in Uttar Pradesh, some of these companies are facing difficulties because the government, anticipating elections in a few months, has cancelled all the loans. So if I had a solar home system loan, I would have to pay it. Right? That's great for me, but it's not great for these companies, which means that they're not selling solar home systems right now until the elections are over. So that's quite interesting, right? No subsidies, so Marigold business, it's a purely commercial business. Doesn't depend at all on government subsidies, donor money. So this is sustainable in a financial sense. And I think it's easy to scale. So people always express a little kind of confusion when I say this, but I do think that if you can go to a village, you can electrify it in one day. You don't need a car even anymore. You can do it on a motorcycle. It's so simple. One day, two guys electrify, go home. I think you can electrify a large number of villages fairly fast, provided that you have access to capital and those kinds of things. So there are still some challenges, but I think it's easier to scale than some other ones. Yes?
You mentioned electrifying the village. How large of a village can you electrify with one panel? Or
one typical system is 2 panels, and it's for maybe 30 to 40 households. A village may have anywhere between 50 to 5,000, maybe not 5,000, that's too much, maybe 50 to 500 households, okay? So depending on the village, you'll have 1 to 10 systems running. So I think the unit of analysis, or the unit of operation for these companies, is not really a village, it's a hamlet, which is a kind of a concentration of 20 to 50 households. In India, generally, the sort of settlements are so everybody has a neighbor. Whereas in some other, like Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, many countries, the households are very far from each other, so microgrid is a much more difficult proposition. Yeah?
So if like 2 panels gave 270 watts each for a total of like 540 or something, and how many houses?
Let's say 40.
40, so that means each house is, if there was 50 houses of 500 watts, each house is only getting like 10 watts.
10 watts, yeah.
So they can have a 10 watt light bulb?
So with these LED lights these days, that is enough. Yeah.
All right, so that's enough to benefit them?
For 2 lights and a mobile charger.
Okay, and then so since you're running low voltage loads and it's a voltage coming out of the solar panel, a current source, so then what's the grid voltage? Is it just the solar panel voltage with some regulators down line?
I think so, but I'm really not the right person to answer that question. So I would probably have to check the details.
Okay.
I don't think I ever asked that question. My engineering background is limited to the fact that my dad's an engineer. At some point I told him that I think I'm going to do something else. Initially I was going to be an engineer. Instead of do something else. Yes?
2 questions sort of related. One is the $2, that's a flat rate, or can houses choose to scale up?
It's flat rate. That's one of the limitations of this system, is that you cannot scale it down. This is the service you get, this is the price you pay, that's it.
And how, I was going to say, just how do they collect, how does the company collect it? Do they just have someone come?
Yeah, they're local people who go and collect the revenues. This is one of those things, I don't know exactly how it works, and they made sure that I wouldn't know it because it's one of their, sort of things that they do well. But yeah, it's based on a collection system, so there's no prepaid anything. You get the service, and then if you don't pay, you lose your connection. Yeah.
And the system is maintained by the company?
By the company.
Oh, okay.
Exactly. So there are some other companies that kind of basically lease it to an entrepreneur who then takes care of that. Husk Power, for example, in Bihar does that. But Meragao is basically, they run the entire show. So it's a very sort of hands-on approach to this, which is, of course, potentially problematic because it means that you have to have these things. But it also has some benefits. So my understanding is that they've hired a lot of local people. And these are all from the villages. So they don't bring, because it would be way too expensive to bring somebody from a business school to run the business. You really need the local people. And that, in some sense, is a great thing. Because it means that these people get training, they make money much more than they would make in farming. So this really has some sort of nice benefits there, yeah.
Are people trying to steal from?
Yes, they are.
How do they deal with that?
If you do it, you lose the connection for 6 months or something. By that time, you're desperate and you don't do it anymore. In fact, some cases, of course, if there are too many people in the village, they'll take the entire system away. So I've seen this once. We went to a household where we sort of found that they had used this weird device to get around the restriction. So they were running a fan, and as a result, the wire was in, and all the systems were in a lot of trouble. And they had detected that because they sort of realized that it's not working. They have some kind of a monitoring system, so then we went and did some things to fix the system, and then I don't know how they dealt with that particular household, so I left and I didn't want to see it. Yeah.
Quick question along those lines is, so in America we pay the bill by how much electricity we use. Over there it's like $2 for everybody.
Yep.
So how do they monitor that each person isn't taking too much?
So yeah, there is
it like an honor system?
No, the way the system is set up is that there is some kind of a device that basically makes sure that you cannot get, that there's a sort of restriction. You get the same flat rate throughout the sort of 4 or 5 hours that it's on. But again, as I said, some of these villages have found ways to get around this, in which case there's trouble.
Those of you who don't know, what would happen in 1910 and 1930 was they would buy some electrical power from someone, amplify it, and then sell it to their neighbor as a utility. You had the ability to actually declare yourself an electrical utility. It turns out they went to Congress, paid some bribes, and had that changed. They also changed the billing equation. The billing equation used to be P equals IE times dollar value of a watt. The equation is now P equals I squared R times dollar value. You're not measuring how much you're using. You're measuring how much the heat is being lost.
Oh.
In the wires?
Yes. Which lets them also tell what device you're running it on. Because the bigger the device you put it on, the bigger your R is going to be. And that shows up on the load. Which is why they know that you tampered with it.
Okay.
What they did was they inserted a diode, which controls the voltage. Actually, the amperage. Capacitors are used for voltage control. They're commonly inserted into solar panels to control how well they work. One of the problems is that it tends to screw up equipment that the electrical engineers use, so we usually have to go and cut it out. Wow. So what they were doing was they were circumventing the actual diode.
I see. Yeah, I think that's often the sort of the approach.
So in the United States, it is a very rigged system to guarantee profit. Electrical utilities are guaranteed the highest level of profit of any energy in the United States.
Really?
So if I could just interject, just in the interest of time, since this is definitely a power conversation, it's about an hour, and Professor Urpelainen has been very generous to entertain our questions during his presentation. Let's let him just get a little bit further through, because I'm sure maybe he can answer some of the other questions, and then we'll save a little bit more time for the discussion towards the end.
So I don't have that many slides left, so I think this will be easy. So as I said, some limitations. So you cannot provide these things like water pumping. It's not possible with this kind of 10 watts. Not going to get anything done with that. You cannot run a fridge, no fan, no AC, no computer. All that is outside your sort of, it's not within reach. And these would be a lot more expensive systems. There are some companies that provide sort of larger loads, but then that becomes a completely different game, because for the poor households, the idea that they could pay, $20 a month or something is completely impossible, and it will become a kind of more middle class phenomenon, or alternatively for farms who are interested in making profits. And then there is a bit of an equity issue. So this is a big debate in India, is that that $2 a month, as I said, it's not a lot of money for these villages, it's something they can manage. But if you look at the unit cost, it's very high. And that means that they pay a lot more for one unit of electricity than some wealthy middle-class person would pay in Delhi. Okay? And then, of course, when you go to people and you talk about this, they don't like it. They think it's very unfair. I think I agree that it's a little unfair that somebody who makes a few $100 a year pays more than somebody who makes, whatever, $30,000 a year. I think that's unfair. But that's how it is right now, and there's a big debate on should these rates be regulated. But the big problem here is that if you set the rate too low, nobody's going to provide any solution, then you have to go back to kerosene, you pay even more. It's a very complex problem, and right now there's a lot of debate in India on that. So let me tell you briefly about the design that we have in mind for this. So my problem here is that I don't have the money yet. So I was hoping that I would finally have the decision from my funder by today. It didn't happen. Next week, definitely. I think I have a good chance, but we'll see then. So we create a random sample of 120 hamlets. So these sort of clusters of 20 to 40 households, and we do this in the area where the company already works. One of the nice things about Uttar Pradesh is that you will not run out of villages, and almost none of them have any good power access. So it will be easy to create this sample. We do it in the Shitapur district, which is north of Lucknow, the capital. It's a 4-hour drive or so. A very nice, beautiful area. I love going there every time I can. We'll have a total of 1,800 households in the study. So every hamlet is about 15 of them, and of those, maybe 80, maybe 60 are in the treatment group, which will get a microgrid funded by us and set up by Marigal Power, and then the rest will be in this control group where they don't get the power. They will get it after the study, because if you go to these people and say you don't get power, they'll just go crazy. You have to tell them that, wait a year or something, and then we'll provide them with the service. We'll do at least 3 surveys in the beginning. We do a baseline before the microgrids are set up. We do a midline 6 months into the study, and then we do an endline 12 months. Now this is a short period of time, so we cannot look at long-term effects. So if the study goes well, we'll apply for follow-up funding. Once the microgrids are set up, continuing this is very cheap. So if Tata Center or anybody else here at MIT is interested in doing more research, we're more than happy to team up to do the follow-ups. And we'll do fairly detailed surveys. We'll ask all kinds of things, so not only economic, but also social attitudes. We might do some little survey experiments to see how people's kind of use of the world and other things have changed. Okay? So that would be the plan. And if we receive the funding at this point, we'll start in January. If not, we'll find another fund. That's the plan. So one thing is nice about this is that the experiment focuses on the effects. Okay, so we randomly provide the microgrids at the hamlet level. Okay, so it's a randomized controlled trial, it's an experiment. But we can also look at adoption, because when we provide the systems, not everybody is going to take it up. So America is telling me maybe 75–80% take, which seems about right based on what I've seen in the villages. But there are a few interesting things. Well, first of all, we'll see exactly who's going to take it up. We'll see when they do it. Do they do it immediately or only after the neighbors take it? People in this area are very sensitive of their status relative to other people in the village. So if the neighbor has nice lighting, there is a huge incentive to have nice lighting as well. Okay? So we can look at learning, we can look at diffusion, we can look at these kinds of things. Not in an experimental sense. So this is all kind of traditional observational analysis, but it's quite interesting because it hasn't been done in the past. Okay? And this is something the Marigal people are interested in. For them, this is useful data because they can try to figure out what kind of villages are ideal for this business. And so on. Okay. This is the first thing we can do already in January, because we do the baseline. Marigal will then share their data with us, and we can then do the analysis. And then we get to the impact evaluation, which we'll do over time. We're going to look at fuel expenditures. Are these households spending less money on kerosene? Fairly easy to measure. This is something that's quite salient to your poor household. Health and environmental benefits, a little more difficult, so we can look at, are there fewer kerosene fires? Are these people reporting sort of better lung functioning and so on? We cannot do this full scale because it's incredibly expensive to measure health effects directly, but at least we can get some sort of sense of this. Household income, small business, we can look at this. We can look at if small business activities are increasing. Are some of these households starting to do things they didn't do in the past? in the treatment group. Social capital, do we see people getting together at night because they now have lighting, they can play some games or have community meetings or something. We can look at male-female dynamics. Uttar Pradesh is one of the most conservative states in India. It's a very strong bias against women. One hypothesis of this microgrids is that if you provide better lighting, it might make life easier for women in particular because they can go out at night and it's a little safer. Right now it's a very dangerous thing for women to go out at night because it's dark. And there could be violence and crime. Okay. We can look at one favorite hypothesis of everybody in this business is that children study more if they get better light. Everybody tells me that. We can see if that actually happens. We have designed actually tests. So we can look not only at if they study more, but whether they're learning more. There are some simple ways to test literacy and numeracy in these areas. They're very cute and they're very nice. So I'm very excited to see if this actually works. Okay, so that's my conclusion. As I said, I was almost done. So we are looking at solar microgrids for rural development, not with rural development with the big R and big D. This is not big stuff. This is sort of one intervention that will not make anybody's life amazing. It will make it a little easier. It may have some benefits, but it has this nice feature that it's not that expensive. So this is something that could, in principle, provide a kind of short-term relief to, I think, to 100 million people. Not in a big sense again, but in a sort of small but meaningful sense. We can look at both technology adoption and then experimental in a more rigorous way. We can look at the impacts of these systems. And once we've done that, hopefully that will be of interest to policymakers, donors, companies, and so on.
I have one comment. It's a wonderful idea, and I only have to think of what happens to me at night when the power goes off. And it's dark, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? The computer doesn't work, the lights don't work, I can't do anything. It's like you were just put in a cell in isolation or something. You know?
Yes, I think for many of these people, and especially in the villages that don't have any kind of a grid, when they see this for the first time, it is the most amazing thing they've ever seen in their life, that you can have a nice lighting solution. I know of one company, Gram Power. It's a very different business model, but they set up a system in Rajasthan, and the first person to get the connection was this 95-year-old man. And apparently it was a very kind of emotional moment because this man had been living for 95 years with no electricity, no lighting. And then he finally sort of realized what this thing can do. And it was apparently quite amazing. Oh, yes, sir.
Do you have any idea what the rate of return is? Is there room for like a co-op or something wanting to do this?
That is a very good question. I don't know exactly. This is, again, one of those things they don't necessarily want me to know. But I do know that it's a profitable company. So the Mega Power makes money out of this, including the salaries of the sort of guys who set it up. So this is it's a good business. My understanding is that in principle you could do that. If you can find a village where there's a sort of functioning local, some kind of community body that takes these decisions, I think a village could do this. There's no reason. In fact, they could go to some of these other companies that sell these systems like Husky Power and just buy one. I think the big challenge is governance. So if you want to do it as a village, everybody has to chip in a little bit, and then you have to make sure that everybody gets the power. And I think that's something that I don't know how well the villages so far managed to do it. Because often there is this kind of, it's not a paradox, but it's a big problem that the villages that aren't doing that well are the ones that don't have lighting and that don't have any solution. So the ones who are the least capable of using these new technologies because of whatever kind of community conflict or something. Yeah.
So how does off-grid solar compare with other off-grid techniques such as off-grid biomass or off-grid other things in the context of India?
Okay, so it depends completely on the context. So if you happen to be in a sort of hilly area or mountainous something where you have small rivers, then small hydro would be a lot less, not necessarily less expensive for the small lots of power, but there you might be able to set up a system that allows you to run a fan and maybe even some agricultural production. Okay. If you are in an area where a lot of people have cows and a lot of cow dung and there's a sort of way to get people to collaborate, then biomass might be more expensive. I think the big benefit of solar is that India is a very sunny country. And for these kinds of technologies, this is something I learned recently, I didn't know this, the intensity of the solar radiation doesn't matter. What matters is that it's available all the time. Okay? And in many areas of India that is the case. So solar has the big benefit that in almost any part of India you can do it. For the small loads at least, whereas biomass, hydro, you have to be in a specific type of area or community. Yeah.
Actually,
actually, government in Uttar Pradesh, it is distributing free notebooks to all the high school students now. They recently started, they're distributing millions of notebooks. So does this system have any provision for charging notebooks and laptops, because all the students will be having it?
That's an interesting question. Do you know what the power requirement for the...
I'm not very sure about that.
That's what I want to say, because my guess would be no, just based on sort of, I think it would probably require a little more than what's available here. But I could imagine that sort of if you had communities that have a lot of these notebooks, and they really want to use them, they might be willing to pay the cost of charging, and those communities might actually provide an opportunity for a sort of larger system exactly because of the notebooks.
I'm asking you primarily because government is distributing these notebooks to the very poor students. So lots of these guys in backward areas, they'll be acquiring this new stuff, and they would have no means of charging it.
Yeah, that sounds like a typical government program. Yeah. So I would have to check the details, but it might go the way some of these previous solar home system programs, that you end up with a lot of notebooks that nobody uses and that don't work. That's a sad reality, is that the poorest households might not. Yes.
So you're focusing on Uttar Pradesh. What do you see as some of the major challenges in expanding this to other areas of India?
Well, I think in the south, I would see a lot less need for this, because the electrification rates are simply so much higher and the quality is so much better. I don't know if people would want to pay for this. Especially in the sort of best performing states like Gujarat, I don't think this would make any sense. I think in Bihar, this would be a great opportunity. Bihar actually, as a sort of environment for business, is better than Uttar Pradesh. Bihar is famous for being sort of, it's the worst performing state historically, but now it has a very capable and competent government. So it would be a nice place to do this. I think this kind of a business could also be expanded to Orissa, which is a very poor state, very similar to Uttar Pradesh. Maybe Madhya Pradesh to some extent. Andhra Pradesh is doing a lot better, so I don't know if they would have this. I think in the areas where there is an energy poverty issue, I think this model would scale quite well. But the limits would then, when you come to the wealthier states, I just don't think there would be that much demand for this. Yeah.
What breaks, what needs maintenance in my company?
So the panel itself, you have to clean it and check nothing's wrong. The wires, sometimes you have to replace them. The battery is I think a big concern is that you have to replace it every now and then. And one thing about these companies that we do need to keep in mind is that these are new companies. So we don't know what happens 10 years from now when all the solar panels start to break down at the same time. Are they making enough money to replace them and so on? So I think those are the main sort of components. Yeah.
So I visited Grand Power actually, and they mentioned that theft of solar panels can be a problem, but not one they've experienced. Has this been a problem here?
My understanding is it hasn't been a problem. And I think it's partly because the people in the company go often enough that if somebody steals it, then they'll say like, oh, okay, fine, then the entire community loses the electricity, which means that the person who stole it, everybody always knows in these villages who's stealing it. There's never any question about that because it's such a small, tightly kind of knit community. I think that person will be in a very bad position. These communities are self-enforcing their kind of rules, and often Uttar Pradesh is also famous for very high gun ownership rates. So you can see children carrying shotguns and all that. So it's really not a good idea to do that. Yeah.
Was it hard to convince Marigao to have they explicitly can't go in and monopolize them? I mean, it sounds like it's a large.
Yes, it was. It was difficult because obviously for them as a business, they don't value the idea that there's some villages there that complain and you cannot go and provide them. So in fact, I learned this sort of remarkable thing in talking with them was that their concern wasn't so much that they have to electrify 100. Their concern was that they are not allowed to electrify some. So they basically told me that the smaller the control group, the less I need your grant money to do this. Which to me is just amazing. I didn't understand this. I've learned so much about business from this, by the way. I should probably go and consider another career now. That's a little arrogant, and I think I would fail, but still, I think I'm yes, sir.
Yeah. So are these companies essentially relying on the fact that the grid will never reach there? The whole picture changes if the government takes political will to put up the grid there. Because when I talk to people at Hush Power, like even consumers, they were telling me that, they were waiting for the grid to come, because then they would pay 1/3 the cost or half the cost.
I think actually, in some sense, it's easier to work. I don't know how it's Maragall Power in particular, but it's easier to work in a village that has electricity. Once people see how bad the supply is.
No, so I'm just saying it's relying on the fact that there aren't coal plants or anything coming up, right?
No, that's the thing. It's easier to work in a village that has the grid. Because once people see how bad the performance of the grid is, that you can never get the electricity when you want it, you cannot do anything with it, it's always a blackout every other week, that's when they really want solar. Because they get used to electricity, but they realize that the government is not giving them any. I think these companies would go out of business immediately if India did a serious power sector reform and actually solve the fundamental problems. We would not be talking about any of this. We would just draw the lines, build power plants, and deal with it. But I think right now, in these areas, I think in some states like Rajasthan, where the grid is performing a little better, this could be a challenge. Because there, if you get connection, you'll get electricity at night and your willingness to pay does go down. Yeah.
So this is the last question, sorry. This will be the last one, and everyone can kind of go talk to Johannes afterwards.
Sure.
So is the government supporting them or creating problems for these companies in some way?
Depends, I think, on the state. I think most of these companies, it depends a lot on their business model. So if you do what Maragall Power is doing, all you need from the government is don't cause any trouble. So let us do this. And right now, I think it's mostly working quite well. If you're one of these companies that provides these sort of big systems for productive loans, then you need a subsidy. There's no way. And then you have to collaborate directly with state governments. And then it depends on if the state is well governed or not.
So then what about utilities? Don't they have a problem?
But the utilities are almost all state-owned.
Yeah.
So if the utility has a problem, then the government has a problem, and vice versa. And the utilities, I think, for these kind of technologies is not a problem. Because the utilities are basically, the little money they are making, they're all going bankrupt. They would make it from selling to the middle class and the industry. These people don't consume enough to make it a profitable business.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you.